Ethan Crumbley, 15-year-old school shooter responsible for killing 4 people out of Oxford, Michigan. Of course, arrested, charged with a whole slew of crimes, murder, terrorism, carrying a firearm inside of a school, all of those different offenses. But his parents are also being charged with the crime. This is raising some eyebrows because we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of school shootings in America, but not the charging of the parents. The big question is, why are the parents being charged when they didn't do anything? The kid shot everybody in the school. Are the parents responsible? Some people are saying, yeah, absolutely. When you take a look at the facts of this case, it's pretty obvious. Some people say, no, it's not quite enough. I want to see what you have to think about it and say about it. So let's take a look at our mind map. This is what it looks like. This is available if you want to poke around over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. You can actually get a link and zoom around and navigate this to your heart's desire. But today we're going to start by talking about the timeline. We're going to also look at the victims. There were 4 people who were killed. We're going to review the law. We're going to look at Ethan Crumbley's family. We're going to take a look at the social media that was put out there because there's a lot of it. We're going to review some of the most important issues that are still outstanding, and then we'll check in and see when the next court date is. As you can see, some people are viewing this mind map, so they'll pop in and out. Just ignore that. That's not part of the data. It's just people who are poking around and taking a look at what is happening here. Okay, so Ethan Crumbley, we know this gentleman, age 15, and so he's responsible for a school shooting that took place out in Oxford. Let's zoom out. We're going to piece together this very complicated timeline, and you're going to see there's a lot going on here. But let's close some of this up and break it down bit by bit. We're going to start off with Oxford High School. Oxford High School, of course, is where this all took place. We can see this photograph gives us just a little bit of a scene, pool entry at the front of the auditorium. It looks like they've got a sheriff's car parked outside. This is in Oxford, Michigan, another very familiar place because there's been a lot of activity out of this area as well. Of course, right outside of Detroit, we've got Flint up here. Heard a lot about Flint, and Oxford High School is sort of nestled out there in the suburbs and kind of outside of the metro area, far outside of Detroit. And so just so we can get our bearing straight, that's what we're talking about. Now, we also have, if you want to go and read this in its entirety, you're of course welcome to do that. But the school is asking for an independent investigation. And so here we've got a PDF that shows that the Oxford Community Schools saying, Dear Wildcat Nation, everybody impacted by this thing. Grief, tragedies, unfolding, horrific. We're now reviewing everything. We're reviewing attendance records. We've asked an independent security consultant to review all of this stuff. Prosecutor is saying that they want the school's version of the events leading up to the shooting. The prosecution, just hasn't given them enough information yet. And so they give us some more details about what they observed and what they saw. But a lot of it is continuing to mirror the same materials that we saw in the news. And so I'll let you read that at your leisure. But they're asking for an independent investigation. They've got an independent security company that's going to be doing that for them, and they're going to be trickling out more information. Right now, we've got a lot of the details sort of from the government side, but not from the school side. Prosecutor came out and gave us a lot of details, but we still have some holes that we need to fill in. So now we know where this is taking place. Oxford High School. Now, if we rewind the clock a little bit, we can go back and we can see that on November 21st, remember the shooting takes place on 11:30. We're going to spend a lot of time on this. So 11:30 is when the actual shooting takes place. We've got some social media posts on 11/27. We go a couple days before that. We get a gun purchase on 11/26. But even before that, on November 21st, we get this ammunition search that's happening. And so what's going on here? We can see that a teacher saw Ethan searching for ammunition on his phone and did something about it.
On November 21st, 21, a teacher at the Oxford High School observed Ethan Crumbley searching ammunition on his cell phone during class and reported the same to school officials. Jennifer Crumbley was contacted via voicemail by school personnel regarding that son's inappropriate internet search. School personnel indicate they followed that voicemail up with an email but received no response from either parent. Thereafter, Jennifer Crumbley exchanged text messages about the incident with her son on that day, stating, quote, LOL, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught, end quote.
Okay, LOL, I'm not mad at you. You just have to learn not to get caught. That was back on 11/21. And so we've got sort of, this young man who's very interested in guns. They haven't bought a gun yet, but they're probably talking about it. So we've got this big, long sort of a time frame between 11/21, 11/26, 5 days. Ethan is excited as heck. He's like going to Disneyland. He's going to be getting a new gun soon, and it's going to be very exciting. And so he is on his phone at school searching for this stuff. Okay, so school makes note of it. They send an email over to the teachers. They contact the parents. My question, of course, was, how did they contact them? We learned that they sent an email. Do we have a copy of the email? Not that I have seen thus far, but it would be very interesting to see what they said, what they were looking for. We know that the school confirmed for us from the prosecutor's testimony that there was no response from the Crumbley family. Then Jennifer texts, "Don't get caught," says specifically, LOL, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught, is what she said there. So we now know that on 11/21, we got a little bit of troubling behavior. So she gets an email. Presumably, she got it because she texts back. Okay, now we don't know if she's texting back to Ethan because she's responding to the email or if she's just, responding to Ethan. Ethan said, Mom, I got in trouble at school. I was searching for ammo. She said, well, why'd you do that? Don't get caught next time. Or did she actually get the email? And did she get the email and did the school in the email say, hey, your son's looking for ammunition. This is going to be a big problem. There's going to be remediation or remedial steps. What's in the email? And what did they say? Because some people are saying maybe the school's responsible for this. If they saw some other things and they included it in the email, hey, your son is looking for ammunition best used to murder high school kids. If he's searching for that, right, that's a different thing than searching for 9mm ammunition range pricing. It's a different type of search. So, what's happening specifically? Do we know? Well, it went out in an email. Did Jennifer get it? Probably, because she responded and told her son, don't get caught. We saw that here. But it's not enough to deter Jennifer. Jennifer doesn't care. Blows it off, says, just don't get caught. We're still going to go buy a gun anyways. This is what they purchased. It's a Sig Sauer. 11/26 is the date of purchase, and we have a lot of activity surrounding this purchase. So first and foremost, this was purchased at Acme Guns. James and Ethan were present. Let's take a look at who James is. We've only heard of Ethan so far. So now we got to bring the father into the picture. Let's take a look over here at the family. We zoom back in on James Crumbley. This is Dad. James Crumbley has a little bit of a problem. He's got a sort of an outstanding child support delinquency emanating out of Florida. And so you can see what this one looks like. Doesn't mean he's, a murderer or somebody who committed involuntary manslaughter, but this is something that people are noticing. He's got, enough money to spend on a new gun, but not enough money to spend on paying child support in the amount of $1,172. So people are sort of, thinking about what that might say about the man. So we know a little bit more about him. Apparently worked as a technology salesman, recently ran into legal trouble in Florida over child support payments. Spokesperson for the last employer, San Francisco company, said that they provide GPS tracking. He briefly worked there. He was terminated for reasons unrelated to this incident. So recently fired. That's Dad. While we're over here looking at family, let's take a look at Mom, because Mom's going to come into the picture here very soon as well. We've got Jennifer Crumbley. You can see here. Jennifer, age 43, worked as a real estate broker in the Oxford area. Staff bio has been taken down. James's online presence demonstrates a preference for the Seattle Seahawks. She wrote an open letter to Donald Trump, kind of an interesting letter. Said something about, as a hardworking middle-class law-abiding citizens, I'm sick of getting blanked in the blank and would rather be blanked by the blank. I'd rather be grabbed by the blank. I'm tired of getting blanked in the blank and would rather be grabbed by the blank. All right, so that's the type of open letter that this person is writing. And then we have Eli Crumbley, who is, it sounds like Ethan's half-brother. It's Crumbley's daughter, a son from another father. And so here's a picture of the two of them on Easter. We got Ethan Crumbley and Eli, who are celebrating Easter together. He's got an Angry Birds shirt and an Easter egg and a Star Wars hat on. Looks like a kid. So we have all of that happening there. That's the family. You can see that's just a quick overview of this. Family, a little bit more details. I think this was a link to their house. This is what the house looked like outside of the property. Brian Enton posted, says, quiet outside the Crumbley house tonight. Entire family's in jail. Mom, dad, son, all separated. Not allowed communication. We're going to talk more about that, but you can see that's what the house looked like. And so we've got some more details to dive into back on the timeline. Let's scoot out of the family and let's go back over to the timeline. So we know that the gun is purchased on 11/26. Ethan makes a social media post. Here's what that looks like. It's the new Sig Sauer. He's very excited about this. And when you zoom in on this, it says this is a video from YouTube. Somebody's got 6.3 million subscribers. He's a gun person. This video's got 1.2 million views. The SP 2022, the Sig Sauer. And Ethan Crumbley, 4 days ago from the time that this was posted, or from the time that he posted this, not from the time the video was posted, he posts a comment, says, I just got mine today. Looks amazing. Ethan Crumbley's on YouTube, very excited about it. So now he says, I've got mine. So is that his gun? Did mom and dad buy the gun for him? Is there any conversation about that? Any text messages on mom and dad's phone? We'll have to find out. But he posts, it is his, on Facebook. Now, he's a 15-year-old kid, so who knows? But then Jennifer comes back out, mom, on 11/27, and she posts something. This looks like this is on Instagram. Gen C78 posts, Mom and Son Day, testing out his new Christmas present. His. My first time shooting a 9mm, I hit the bullseye. My first time. Doesn't even shoot guns. My first time shooting a 9, though, I hit the bullseye. But it's his new Christmas present. That's on 11/27. So they bought it even before Christmas. Ethan says it's mine. Mom says it's his. 11:30, we get to shooting. A lot of activity here. We're going to break this down bit by bit. So early on in the day, we get indication that there is a drawing discovered. Drawing is of a semi-automatic handgun. That's in quotes. That's from the people who are reporting this. We have here, it includes a drawing of a bullet, drawing of a laughing emoji. There's some indication that apparently a teacher took a picture of this with a cell phone, although we have not seen this. And this drawing was problematic because it had a lot of language in here like this. The thoughts won't stop. Help me. Blood everywhere. My life is useless. The world is dead. So Ethan, a 15-year-old sophomore, is writing that on a piece of paper. A teacher comes up and sees that. My life is useless. The world is dead. Blood everywhere. The thoughts won't stop. Help me. Drawing of a bullet, semi-automatic handgun. Teacher takes a picture with a cell phone. Ethan is scribbling this out, blacks it out as soon as he's discovered. So the teachers obviously call the parents. There's a school meeting that happens. Same day, 11:30. School meeting happens. We get some conclusions. Parents say not that big of a deal. Parents urge Ethan to stay in school. He's actually returned to the classroom. Counselor, school counselor, everybody says, all right, that's fine. He can go back to class, but got to get counseling within 48 hours. If he doesn't get that, maybe something else will happen. We don't know. We don't have any idea what the photo actually looks like that Ethan altered. Apparently, he blacked it all out and manipulated it so you can't see what it was. We don't know who the school counselor is. I've got questions. Who is that person? No backpack inspection. Parents didn't check the backpack. School didn't check the backpack. Did anybody have a duty to do that? Was anybody supposed to check it? Should the parents have checked? Should the school have checked? Would a reasonable person have checked? Did anybody offer to check? Did anybody think about checking? Should the parents have thought to check, given the fact that they just knew that they just bought their son a gun for Christmas, and they actually just went out shooting with it? Mother and son, and she hit the bullseye. Who knows how Ethan shot on that day? So they bought him a gun. He knows how to use it. In fact, they just went out shooting. He draws on the school campus that world is dead. My life is useless. Blood everywhere. The thoughts won't help stop me. Would a reasonable parent have thought to check for a gun? It's a good question. We'll have to see. And does it matter? Does the law, is that what the law says? Does the law matter? We'll see. So the school meeting happens. We close that out. Then school shooting starts. Right after the shooting starts, we're talking about parental liability here. Parents now start taking action. At 1:27, Jen texts over to Ethan. Ethan, don't do it. That's what she says. Too late. He's already doing it. Father, James, he goes, uh-oh. I better check to make sure that gun's not missing. Races home, calls 911, says gun is missing. Son might be the shooter. Guess what? He is. Mom knew. Dad knew right away. As soon as they heard about it. Oh, that's it. Yeah, it's Ethan. They knew right away. Didn't even have to think about it. So then, of course, Ethan turns himself in. He's not killed. He goes to court. Here we have some court proceedings. Here is the arraignment of Ethan from the court's perspective. You can see in this perspective, we have Ethan is in this center screen. This is being done by virtual proceeding. He's in a juvenile detention center. Sounds like he's being arraigned in an adult facility here before he's transferred. We're not going to see any lawyers any private lawyers hired to represent Mr. Ethan Crumbley. It's going to be a public defender. And I think in this clip, we see the parents call in. Let's watch.
Mr. Crumbley, I'm going to advise you of your rights and the charges against you. Again, if at any time you do not hear or understand anything, will you please let the court know?
Yes.
You do have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do you understand that right, sir?
Yes, I do.
All right. Count 1 does indicate that you did that on or about November 30th, 2021, Ethan Robert Crumbley did knowingly, willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation commit murder first degree, a felony that the defendant knew or had reason to know was dangerous to human life while intending to intimidate or coerce the civilian population, to wit, the Oxford High School community, and cause the death of Madison Baldwin, Tate Meyer, Hannah St. Juliana, and Justin Schilling, contrary to MCL 750.543F. This is a felony punishable by life without parole or a minimum of 25 to 40 years and a maximum sentence of at least 60 years with reimbursements for government expenses incurred for this violation. This is otherwise known as terrorism causing death. Count 2 indicates that on that same date and time, November 30th.
All right, so you get the gist of it. We know what's happening there. We have another angle of this. Now, this is actually him.
Count 10 alleges that.
So we're just sort of watching his body.
Contrary to MCL 750.8.
Kind of not moving at all.
Murder.
And that's all we get out of him. And then Jen and James, they actually call in. You can see them in the top left up here. So they call in very briefly. We hear a little bit from them. These are the parents calling in. They're basically on the run at this point.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. If you could just state your full names, that would be great.
I'm Jennifer Crumbley.
James Crumbley.
Thank you very much. Anything else from the people before we bring Mr. Ethan Crumbley in and start the
No,
arraignment?
Judge, I would just like to speak as to bond, and I do have a motion to make at the appropriate time.
All right, so he's going to talk about bond. He's going to talk about what the court should do to make sure that Ethan Crumbley does not get out of custody. Parents were not there, sounds like even in the area. They were basically on their way to somewhere else, heading in towards Detroit. We're going to get there in a minute. But you can see that there's a manhunt now for him. They were not there. We have this prosecutor comes out, reads some of the victims' names into the record. Here's what that sounded like.
Willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation commit murder in first degree, a violent felony that the defendant knew or had reason to know was dangerous to human life when intending to intimidate, coerce a civilian population, to it the Oxford High School community, and cause the deaths of Madison Baldwin, Tate Meyer, Hannah St. Juliana, and Justin Schilling.
All right, so we get to see what happens in court. Now, while all that's happening, Ethan gets arraigned. He's not going to have any bond. You know, he's going to be held in custody pending the entirety of this case, I would guess. And then the parents now, the question becomes, well, what happened? Where are the parents at? You know, where were they? We saw that a lot of, you know, the social media posts came out. All of this timeline is now becoming, you know, pretty apparent that the parents kind of maybe played a bigger role in this thing than a lot of people, you know, previously thought. And so prosecutor comes out and decides to charge them. Parents decide, wait a minute, that's ridiculous. We're getting out of here. So parents, now we've got, this is a clip from the sheriff's who is telling us sort of what happened here, how this whole thing unfold. Here is the sheriff.
Our fugitive folks arrived on scene with Detroit at 2325, which is 11:25, just 20 minutes after the call. They arrived downtown Detroit to be with Detroit. Detroit had seen the car, had secured the scene, had established a perimeter, done some great police work. Ultimately, at approximately 1:30 in the morning, the two suspects were taken into custody at 11 Bellevue in Detroit in a commercial vehicle. They were in an art studio within that building that has multiple kinds of partitions, if you will, in that building. They were taken in custody, as I said, at about 1:30 in the morning. Our fugitive apprehension team took custody and possession of them, and they were formally lodged in our jail, where they remain at about 0300, about 3 o'clock in the morning.
All right, so that sheriff had previously talked about, they're going after him. There was a lot of conversation from the parents and the parents' attorney basically saying, no, they're not fleeing. They're just trying to turn themselves in. They're just confused and scared. Show them a little grace, a little empathy. Their son, just murdered a bunch of people and they're freaking out. Anybody can understand that. Sheriff said, that's fine. That's all well and good, but we're just going to go ahead and look for them anyways. And when that happened, the U.S. Marshals also got involved. We saw that the U.S. Marshals here, they posted these, basically, wanted posters. Here's one from James. $10,000 reward for information leading up to it. As we heard from the sheriff, there in fact was information that led to it. Somebody saw the car outside, looks just like this. So police show up outside of Detroit and they're like, uh-oh, yep, that's the car. Somebody called and gave them a tip. And then what we have is them actually being captured. We see that happens here. The manhunt comes to a close. This is them coming out of the art facility.
Word that this search was going on, I couldn't figure out what they would be doing in Detroit. I mean, it is 40 minutes, but it's a busy place. So if they wanted to hide, probably would be a little difficult to hide. But that's where they were. The police realizing they got a call, they got a tip that the car was seen at a location, and the police just swarmed in. We saw heavily armed police officers, SWAT team members all over the east side of Detroit looking for them. We obtained exclusive video to CNN of
a lot of people rounded them up. So they get brought into custody. And then we see what happens in court. So the parents are now captured. We're sort of coming to the conclusion on the timeline. Parents are in court. Now, the timeline is, of course, not going to end here. There's going to be a lot more investigation that takes place. We're going to hear a lot more from different people, including maybe federal charges and things. But for what we can see here, the parents are in court now. And let's take a look at what one of those arraignments looked like this when this took place. Here, this is Karen McDonald. This is the prosecutor. Over here on the top right, we can see the judge. In the middle, we can see Jennifer Crumbley. On the left, we can see James Crumbley. And so there's going to be a conversation here about the charges and about the bond and about whether they should be let out of custody. You're going to see down here in the middle left, we've got one lawyer whose name is Shannon Smith. You can see is representing James Crumbley, which is a little bit surprising to me, given the fact that Ethan didn't have a lawyer. They didn't give him an attorney, but James Crumbley, of course, has an attorney. It's this woman. Her name is Shannon Smith. Where is Ethan's lawyer? I wrote. Now, Shannon Smith is somebody who represented actually Larry Nassar, and so that was the big Olympics case. So this person has some experience on high-profile cases. She's going to be representing James Crumbley. We've got the arraignment that took place. We saw that. Now, both of them, according to the sheriff, all of them are going to be placed on suicide watch given the nature of these charges.
So they are in our jail. All three of them, the son and both parents, they are segregated, each individually in isolation. We have advanced watch on them. There is no indicator that any of them, we always have every person that comes in an intake evaluated by counselors in classification to determine if there's any threats to themselves or anyone else. There was no indication that any of them were suicidal, but out of an abundance of caution, Our amazing corrections team is doing suicide watches on all 3 of them. So they are in custody and again in isolation. So that's a good step.
Yeah, hopefully they are a little bit more focused than Epstein's guards were and nothing happens there. We have Jennifer Crumbley, who is the mother, of course, and when the arraignment was going forward, she's very upset about this. You can see she's bawling her eyes out, and James is not doing well either. They're both recognizing what is happening here. They're being charged with some serious, serious crimes.
Do you understand that you are charged in count 2 for the death of Tate Meyer? Involuntary manslaughter, which is punishable by up to 15 years in prison and or up to a $7,500 fine and mandatory DNA.
I understand.
Do you understand that you are charged in count 3 for the death of Hannah St. Juliana with involuntary manslaughter, which is punishable by up to 15 years in prison and or up to a $7,500 fine along with mandatory DNA testing?
I understand.
Do you understand that you're charged in count 4 for the death of Justin Schilling with involuntary manslaughter, which is punishable by up to 15 years in prison and or up to $7,500 fine along with mandatory DNA testing?
I understand.
Do you understand?
All right, so obviously very, very upset. You know, you're realizing that 15-year maximum penalties for some of these charges, now it's a real thing, right? And they're sitting there in court recognizing that. Yeah, it's not just their son. They're not going to just get to flee and run somewhere and just escape liability. They're charged for this. And so the government, of course, is prosecuting them. Let's take a look at this. And some people are taking a look at these charges and saying, wait a minute, how are they going to be able to prove this? We've got the Oakland County Sheriff. His name is not Tim Willis. The county sheriff, of course, is involved in this. We've heard from him previously. We heard from the judge, Judge Nancy Karniak. And if you are a member over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com and you have access to this form, which everybody does over there, then you can just click on these links and it will take you right to some of the places where you can look these cases up, the actual dockets for the case itself. We also have here Karen McDonald. Now, she's the lead prosecutor. So when she filed these charges, we know that Ethan Crumbley's complaint is going to have a lot of the stuff that you'd expect it to have. We have all the different counts for all the different victims, everybody who was involved in it. Tom Willis, or T. Willis, is the complaining lieutenant. Everybody else who's involved in this, we can see are here. And then we've got a listing of the charges. Count 1, terrorism. That's the one that stands out a little bit, kind of one of those that kind of we don't hear much about when we have these school shootings, but we have a lot of the other ones that we are familiar with. Homicide, first-degree murder, obviously all those. All the assault with the intent to murder, sort of the attempted murder charges. We've got possession of a firearm and the commission of a felony, right? All of those are the standard charges. The big one that stands out, of course, is terrorism. The other big one is the idea that the parents are going to be charged at all. And so the prosecutor came out, announced new charges for them, specifically involuntary manslaughter. And so I've actually linked to the entire Michigan Model Criminal Code. If you want to read through that, you can. But the reason why I pulled this out is because here, you can see what the jurors would be required to do in order to convict somebody of this charge. These are the jury instructions. It says the defendant is charged with the crime. To prove this, a prosecutor must prove each of the elements. 1, the defendant caused the death of the deceased. This is for involuntary manslaughter, 16.10. The defendant caused the death of the deceased. That is to say that so-and-so died as a result of the father. Let's put a name in there. The defendant caused the death of Tate. That is, Tate died as a result of James Crumbley. Wow. So the jury would have to find that he actually caused the death. That's a pretty far removed cause, isn't it? Maybe. Is gross negligence something that might be applied? Second, in doing the act, the defendant acted in a grossly negligent manner. Tate died as a result of Ethan shooting Tate. Ethan shooting Tate because Ethan had access to a gun that James gave him in a grossly negligent manner. Maybe that fits. Then we have different definitions of gross negligence. And then we have some additional jury instructions. Second, in doing the act that caused the death, the defendant intended to injure them. The act charged in this case, and they give you some more jury instructions. So you start to see how the rules work. What is the government going to have to prove? What is the jury going to have to believe in order to convict the parents of involuntary manslaughter? The defendant is charged with the crime. Did the defendant, either James or Jennifer, cause the death of these students? Well, they didn't pull the trigger. They weren't even on school at that time. Ethan pulled the trigger. Ethan was there. Now, did the parents act grossly negligent? And is that one of those elements that we shove into the jury instructions that the jury gets to think about? We have some other interesting concepts here. Things like specific intent. This is a specific intent variant of the crime. This is getting into the legal weeds here. But it's generally asking the question, did the Crumbleys, James and Jennifer, did they intend through their actions to cause the death of these students? Like, did they specifically intend that to happen? And they're saying this is a specific intent variant of the crime, according to these notes. So you can spend a lot of time analyzing and dissecting this, which of course we will. We can also talk about causation as this case develops. We'll continue to talk about causation. Gross negligence, the definition is here. More than just carelessness. It means willfully disregarding the results to others that might follow from a failure to act. Willfully disregarding it. You must find each of the following things. 1, the defendant knew of the danger to another, that there was a situation that required him to take ordinary care to avoid danger. Was allowing Ethan to go back to class without checking his backpack, was that a violation of ordinary care? They knew that the situation may have been bad. They didn't take ordinary care to avoid injury. Maybe. The defendant could have avoided injury by using ordinary care. If they would have just checked the backpack and seen the gun, they would have taken it. Ordinary care would have prevented it from happening. And number 3, that the defendant failed to use ordinary care to prevent another injury, to prevent injuring another, when a reasonable person, it would have been apparent that the result was likely to be serious injury. They didn't do it. They didn't check the backpack. If they would have, it would have been obvious. If they looked in the backpack and they saw the gun, they would, oh, this is a huge problem. We're going to take this home. It's not complicated. In other words, that third element, there's a person standing there that doesn't say, well, maybe we should let him have the gun for the rest of the day. It's obvious. So if they just would have checked, if they would have just taken 1 second and taken a look at it, a reasonable person, knowing everything they know about Ethan, knowing about the text messages, knowing about the private home conversations they had, about the meeting or the email that was sent on 11/21 and all these different things, the parents knowing everything, would it have been reasonable for them to just take a look? Should they have done that? That's gross negligence. The other conversation here, this is a big one. This is going to be a difficult one for the prosecution to prove, I think, is cause of death. There may be more than one cause of death. It's not enough that the defendant's act made it possible for the death to occur. Not enough that it made it possible for the death to occur. In order to find that the death was caused by the defendant, you must find beyond a reasonable doubt that the death was the natural and necessary result of the defendant's act. In other words, if the parent, in this case, James or Jennifer, if they just bought Ethan a gun, was the natural result of that act, was it going to happen that he was just going to go and shoot his school? It's hard to prove that. And what about parents who just want to get into guns with their 15-year-olds? To practice in an American tradition, where back during the Revolutionary era, you maybe gave your 15-year-old son a musket and said, here we go. Gear up. What about people who take their daughters and sons out there and they go shooting on a regular basis and there's no problems at all with that, at all? So buying a gun, even for a 15-year-old as a Christmas present, is that in it of itself something that's reckless and lunacy and grossly negligent? Of course not. Happens all the time in this country and nothing goes wrong. So was the defendant actually the cause of the death? Not just made it possible for a death, but like it was the natural and the necessary result of buying the gun. It's a pretty big burden they're going to have to overcome in order to prove that. I think the defense has a lot to latch onto there. So we now know what the law looks like. We've already talked about what the family looks like. We've covered most of the social media here. We've talked a lot about that new Xmas present, the Christmas present that mom posted out there. We had a couple additional ones from Ethan. So he posted this over on, I think this was also on YouTube. So here he said, this is the gun that I'm going to use. Don't know what that was. SD9VE, Smith & Wesson. Looks like a different model, different gun. Right? This is stuff I'm just posting off or pulling off Twitter and the internet. And so, you can decide whether you think it exists or looks real or not. But this one, I just got mine today. Looks amazing. That's the YouTube video. I think we had another one here. Is this the same one? Yeah, that's the same one. So we'll get rid of that one. But I think, yeah, same location. And then here, he posted a video on TikTok that was sort of a throwing a Molotov cocktail at a cylinder block, which, I know that probably looks scary to a lot of people, but when you're a 15-year-old kid and you've got anything that is flammable, you burn it. Okay, I can speak that as a former 15-year-old boy. So stuff like that doesn't necessarily concern me too much. This is the gun I'm going to use, stuff like that. It's like that could be taken innocently, but not when you compare and contrast that with statements like this. Thoughts won't stop, help me. Blood everywhere. My life is useless. The world is dead, right? Really horrific things to be saying. And so Dad's social media, he also posted stuff like this. Now, this is very interesting. This is where you start to say, well, maybe the parents are kind of in on this thing. So James' dad has a Facebook account, and some people were able to pull this up. Works at Monarch Connected. We heard that previously from another node on this Mindmap. Former business development guy, tech sales. We learned a lot about that. On Facebook, apparently, he posted something like this. Amy Crumbley, maybe his sister, says, payback is coming, dear parents. James says, knowing Ethan, it will come back sooner than later, 3 years ago. Don't know what the context is surrounding that. Don't know what that's all about. But doesn't sound good. Then we have another one here from Facebook. James Crumbley is on there. Christy Gay Brown says, idiots are out in Florida. Maybe they go back to New York where the riots happened. Crumbley says, Trump will protect our Second Amendment. I want my child to get a gun. And again, that is not a horrible thing for a parent to be wanting to experience firearms with their child. So people are then saying, well, is a statement like payback from Ethan? Is that hinting that the parents are sort of, breeding a kid or encouraging this type of behavior or incentivizing it to some degree, nurturing it? Who knows? We've got several issues that we can leave with as a conclusion here. Let's take a look at some of these. We've got causation, which is going to be a very, very important one. We talked about that. Did the parents actually cause the deaths here? Specific intent, mention that. The reasonable person standard. Was it reasonable for the parents to leave? Did they have an affirmative duty to notify the school of the gun? Did they have an affirmative duty to check the backpack? How about mitigation? The parents kind of made some attempts to actually stop this, didn't they? They would say, their attorneys would say. They actually tried to tell them to stop. Jennifer sent an email. Ethan, don't do it. Father called 911. They're trying to help. Prosecutors also have to deal with public opinion. Gun culture is not illegal culture. Spending time with your 15-year-old son to learn about firearms, that's not illegal. That's as American as it gets. So to say that every parent is responsible for anything that their child does might also bring in a concept of parent liability precedence, setting that. Are parents everywhere responsible for what their children do? Kind of a big deal. We have another issue. They're charging Ethan as an adult. Well, if he's an adult, then how are the parents responsible for him? If an adult did this and not a child, then how are the parents responsible for the shooting? We also have a criminal liability triangle. Very interesting little dynamic that is bubbling up here. We have James, who hired a lawyer, maybe for himself. We don't know if that same lawyer is going to be No, it's not. It's not going to be representing the mom because mom has her own lawyer. They've got their two lawyers. There were two of them on their arraignments. But Ethan doesn't have a lawyer. And so what the prosecution is going to do is they're going to start trying to create this triangulation to happen. Ethan, we need you to testify against your parents, and we'll cut you a deal. Jennifer, need you to testify against James. We'll cut you a deal. James, need you to testify against Jennifer, and we'll cut you a deal. And so you're going to have all of these different people being triangulated against one another. And so you might have James and Jennifer, who are this nice cohesive unit right now, but not for long, because they're going to be broken apart. We're going to charge you with all of these additional charges, unless, or we're going to ask for the max in your case, unless you help us get your husband. Then we're going to turn it on him. And he's going to be getting the same deal to flip on Jennifer. And we're going to see what they do about it. So the criminal liability triangle is going to happen. That's going to be fun. There is a search warrant that has just been executed for the family home. So my understanding is that's executing right now. And then we've got some federal gun charges that are currently in the eyes of some U.S. attorney prosecutor somewhere, glistening in the moonlight, waiting for the opportunity to file, I'm sure. Next court date, we've got 12/13, and then we've got James and Jennifer are being seen at 12/14. As I mentioned, if you want to follow along the court docket, all of those links are here in the law section. And so when you scroll over here to the court docket, the James and Jennifer docket jail, you can click all of those links and it will take you there if you want to follow along. But this, my friends, is the Ethan Crumbley mind map. And so this is something that we're going to continue to build out as more data comes out, as more information is revealed. We're going to continue to add this to the mind map, and it's going to grow organically as the case grows. And so if you want to poke around on it, join our community over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We've got the Crumbley mind map. We've got the Ghislaine Maxwell mind map. I'm working on the Alec Baldwin mind map, and there's many others that are going to be coming. This is a very neat format for us to be able to take a ton of data and shove it all into one format that we can all easily understand and follow along as these very interesting cases continue to unfold in front of us. A lot of questions. Are these parents deserving of intentional or involuntary manslaughter charges? What do you think about it? Now that we've seen all this evidence, now that we've seen it all laid out on one chart, I want to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts. Leave a comment below. Before you leave, I'd love a like on the video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, well then what the heck are you doing? Because we have a live show that goes live every weekday and we want you to be a part of it. So join us there. I'd love to see you over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And until then, my friends, be well.